All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the Becoming an Institution-level Cyber-Infrastructure Leader workshop. It is Wednesday, August 6th, 2025, and this is the cyber-infrastructure funding landscape. We're starting with a mini talk from Winona Snapchilds, and then we will have a panel. So let's go ahead and get started. Winona, take it away.
Hi, everybody. So I'll introduce myself briefly and then at least partially because I'll participate in the panel after this. Hi, Dr. Winona Snapchilds. I'm at Indiana University. I have a couple of roles there. I think the reason why Henry invited me here was because I bring an interesting perspective. So I have basically been funded, in various capacities by the NIH or the NSF my whole career, which is pretty awesome. That proves, one case or one data point that pipeline programs work. So thank you to those agencies. So I've participated in, various traineeships, been funded as a postdoc, and now as a professional, have my own funding. Let's see. So I will also share with you all that. So I am now in a cyber infrastructure leadership position, but I had my career aims were to be a full-time faculty member, and I'm definitely not doing that. This has been an interesting journey, and hopefully I can share some tips that I think have really been helpful to me and led me on a good path to success, at least at attaining some funding. I've participated in various capacities in these large-scale cyber infrastructure projects. Some of them you'll know, Exceed and Access, some of the Access resources, Jetstream and Jetstream 2. That means I've done a bunch of management type of activities, proposal writing, proposal winning. I am currently have a couple of cyber infrastructure workforce development projects funded by the National Science Foundation. That's from cyber training and the Skype solicitation. And also had some past funding from the NSF in terms of early concept projects or the EAGER awards. So let's see. This talk is not really about me, but is oriented towards people who are curious about how to get some funding, like what's available to me in terms of funding. And then we'll go into what should you pursue is probably something that we could talk about in the panel, really. Okay. So first, everybody, who talks to me about funding wants to know about availability. What can I get? Where can I get it from? So the rest of these slides are this is a high level one. The rest of the slides are a bit more specific. So there are funding sources that are happening, both from all the way from the international level down to your local institution. So I myself am not really experienced in winning some of these international projects, and many of them are oriented towards infrastructure supporting specific domains. Those are really complicated, and we can talk about. I guess I'm seeing my mentor actually in the audience here, so we can have some audience comments later. Hopefully, I'll do you proud, Craig. So primarily in the United States, the three main funding agencies that supply funding for infrastructure is coming from the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Defense. There are certainly state level resources, but obviously what's available to you is going to depend on your state, and it's going to be, accessible depending on, different qualifications that I really can't speak to. Um, in my experience, there's also frequently institutional support that is available to people at institutes of higher ed. This might be coming from the Office of Research, or the provost's office. Again, that kind of funding really is going to be dependent on what your institution's priorities are and what kind of partnerships you might need to have in order to secure that funding and what it might lead to. So I just put in, these slides will be shared with you all. So I just put an example in there from funding opportunities for my own institution so you can see how some of this is oriented within the context of the Office of Vice President for Research in my case. Um, okay, so there's also, all right, so you know that those opportunities are out there, but how do you find them? This is my view on some of the paths to doing that. So first, the Federal Register. So I put the link there. This is all of these solicitations that are coming from these national agencies have their roots being published in this Federal Register. So these agencies register that these programs are coming up. So this is actually this Federal Register is a really big website, and it takes quite a lot of work to figure out how to navigate it. So that's why I have the second bullet point under there, your institution's research development or foundation's relations staff. So depending on your institution, there are experts that are available that, his main job is orienting faculty towards opportunities. So these are a great go-to resource, for having a consultation about how to more effectively use the Federal Register, because that is available to the Federal Register is open to the public. Then there are a variety of commercial products that I guess concatenate these different responses and are of varying degrees of openness. At our institution, we pay for the Pivot RP. So there is, and these things may be available to you and you might not even know it. So frequently, the institution will pay for a membership in this, and the primary people that are utilizing it are faculty and or research development staff who are working with grant seekers. So it's worth checking out a variety of these to see what's available at your particular institution. So I have used Pivot in the past as well as Candid. These other three, Zephy, GrantWatch, GrantStation, I have not utilized those, so proceed with caution, but these are, many of them are operating on a kind of subscription model and or a membership model. So the chances are that these are better sources of information if you're paying for it, because it is a tremendous amount of work to sort through all the various ways that funding it is publicized, particularly if you're looking for foundation-based funding. So those folks at our institution, for instance, are now homed in the Office for the Vice President for Research, but previously were within the IU Foundation. So it's worth, which is a nonprofit separate from our institution that is the foundation. So again, it's worth going to your institution's web pages to see where these type of staffing titles are located to figure out who is there, and then sending an email. There's a great amount of expertise that's homed in these offices. Okay. Any questions? Let me just take a little pause here. I know I only have 15 minutes. Not yet? Okay. All right. So next, I thought I would just clarify for you all some of the national cyber infrastructure funding opportunities, specific ones that I'm aware of. This is a non-exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good one for folks who are looking for cluster computing, supercomputing, different types of storage, types of resources. So a primary area that is accessible to many different types of institution are what I call the CC Star Awards. So these are coming from the National Science Foundation. We don't have time to cover all of the various areas there, but you can see, so I put the links in the slide to each of the program pages. So after this, you'll have that resource to go back and look at the individual solicitations. So this is an area where CC Star is an area where you can get funding for smaller computer clusters, networking, archives, and also a sort of strategy or planning type of grant for coordinating within, different areas in your region about getting then applying for any of these variety of compute networking storage resources. Another category is the MRI or major research instrumentation from the NSF. So there's now 3 tracks. So one for up to 1.4 million and one from 1.4 to $4 million. So in the past, these had required a cost share. So that's something to watch out for. So you can't just apply for it immediately. You got to have internal conversations and support about a certain amount of contribution from your institution. The really nice thing about those awards is that they are really flexible, and then they really do mean instruments. So the instrument could look like compute plus something else, but frequently they're involving instruments, scientific instruments, and other types of assets that researchers might need to do their research. And then the third track, which caught me off guard and looking at over this last night, was equipment to reduce consumption of helium. I planned after this to go and see what types of awards those are. I find that really interesting. As I understand, helium production is a scarce resource. But moving on, so there's a number of other types of solicitations that the National Science Foundation offers. I kind of lumped these all together in the sort of harder to get category. So there's community infrastructure for computer and information science and engineering. So that one is limited to computer and information science and engineering. Then there are the advanced computing systems and services, ACSS, category 1 and category 2. So those are very large, or what I consider large scale compute funding opportunities. So the most recent ACSS category 1, the initial award was for $20 million. So again, these are very large awards that are meant for national usage. So I believe that per the last solicitation, 90% of it needed to be allocated to the national community, and there is a 10% discretionary allocation, which could presumably be used exclusively for your institution or some other kind of arrangement like that. The Category 2 awards are less funding, but still quite a lot of funding in the multiple millions range. And those are typically meant for more exotic type of hardware and don't necessarily need to be in production until the latter part of the award. So for those of you here who work really closely with different research teams on campus, I point you to the next 2 categories. Those are the mid-scale research infrastructures. So those are also very large awards. Typically, they're led by science teams with cyber infrastructure teams supporting the scientific endeavors. Mid-scale, one of these, I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now, but goes up to $100 million. So that's they're very large. So from 4 million to 20 million and 20 million to 100 million. So those also require, quite a lot of support in order to get off the ground. but they are available. And I would encourage, again, for people to working closely with different science teams to talk about those things. Okay, a few more. So not all cyber infrastructure is compute. It also means networking and software and people. So I'm pointing to a sort of compilation of opportunities here. So first is referred to as CSSI, Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation. Those come in three different flavors, and those are for software development. They have sort of a smaller or award category called Elements, framework implementations, that's a bit larger, and then a transition to sustainability. I see some award winners in the audience, so you already know about these. Congrats on your awards. Um, so a lot of those are really focused, though, on supporting scientific software. Those are the most common awards coming out of that category. Similarly, there's the CDS&E, that's Computational and Data Enabled Science and Engineering Awards, and slightly different focus there. And then CICI, the Cyber Security Innovation for Cyber Infrastructure. So these support sort of different elements of cyber infrastructure. The next three, or I guess the next two, are really people focused. So the training-based workforce development for advanced cyber infrastructure, strengthening the cyber infrastructure professionals ecosystem. There's the Skype award, and then this is called the cyber training, and I'll update that slide afterwards. So cyber training is really focused on the development of educational type of resources to train different groups on different infrastructures. The Skype program is one of the larger awards in the sort of people focus, and that one is about strengthening the cyber infrastructure professional ecosystem. This provides opportunities to hire whole people that are meant to do a variety of types of cyber infrastructure work. The most common one is in researcher-facing roles, so that could be, to use the CARC nomenclature, a facilitator or a research software engineer. There's also one of the newer awards is hiring network engineers, and that's to improve the local and or regional cyber infrastructure ecosystem, but also they work with part of the requirement for those awards is to give time to support the National Computational Science Support Network that's managed through the Access program. And then finally, for those of you who are in EPSCoR jurisdiction, there are quite a lot of awards that are called the EPSCoR series. So there are just a lot of detailed requirements in that one, and a lot of variety of programs. So definitely worth taking a look at. And if you aren't sure if your state is an EPSCoR jurisdiction or not, good news is that Google, it's really easy to Google. So please feel free to ask me any questions about that coming up. All right, so a couple more kinds of options here. So again, there are some National Institutes of Health grants that will help you get different types of instrumentations. Those are going to have, a need for really strong and health-oriented science drivers. Department of Energy, I'm not really aware right now of if they are offering actual funding. They offer, in the next couple of slides, they do offer cycles to people, but not direct funding as far as I can tell. And finally, the Department of Defense has an instrumentation program too. And please see that solicitation for more about that. Okay, so you're all, okay, that was a lot. But the good news is it just really showcased that there are quite a lot of opportunities that are available to us as researchers and people at an institution of higher ed to apply for funds for a variety of cyber infrastructure. But that's not the whole picture, though. You don't always just need money. Sometimes, really, what you need are just access to resources. And so, my time is short here, so I will kind of just leave it these slides unread, and just to highlight that there are a variety of platforms from a variety of different sources that are really just about getting people access to existing resources, cloud computing, supercomputing, all kinds of GPUs, accelerators, storage, all sorts of things. And these are offered by the NSF, by the Department of Energy, and the National Institutes of Health. There's also commercial cloud offerings. So uh, these are the variety of programs that currently exist through these commercial cloud providers. I don't have Oracle up here, so that would be I will go and try to see what Oracle has got in terms of offerings for cyber infrastructure. The weakest one right now is the Intel University research programs. It looks like they're in a sort of transition with their programs there. So I would focus your attention on the top four for sure. And then, of course, what's some really cool things are happening at the state levels. That again, these aren't options for funding, but these may get people access to resources that are needed. So I just point out a few: Empire AI, AI Tennessee, and the Utah AI Learning Lab. If you and your state are offering have something similar, feel free to drop it in the chat because I think that's useful to share. Okay, so that's the quick rundown of CI funding that I've got for you today. Any questions? Okay, yes. All right, I've got the chat open. I will go ahead and stop sharing. Yes, so let's see, we'll start at the top. Clark is a fan of, I'm going to have to go there. It'll take a minute to go there. Okay, sorry. All right. Institutional funding is also a commercial product within. Thank you for that, Ashley. That's great. Yes, so I got a comment from Kyle about MRI not taking submissions that cycle. Right. As the funding for at the National Science Foundation is let's just say undergoing revisions at this point. So it's unclear to me. They always got to, I put the little asterisk in my slides to say, not sure what's been archived yet because it seems to change day by day. But right, so CC Star and MRI may not be taking may not be having offerings in the 26 funding cycle. Still, um, there is kind of, this isn't necessarily a terrible thing for us because it does, when you're applying for these awards, you can't really just spin one up off the ground in a couple of weeks, right? It takes a lot of preparation to really, especially if you are new to writing grants or new to funding, there's a lot of requirements, detailed requirements, and all those solicitations that need to be met. And sometimes it takes, particularly for CC Star that requires a cyber infrastructure plan, a lot of different people to provide you with information that you may not know. For instance, details about your networks and your IPv6 capability in the past have been requirements, and some of the network engineers may not know that information. So it took me, in fact, a few weeks to get a straight answer out of somebody, which for that particular one. Um, let's see. Yes, thanks, Mike, to having more details about access. My link just takes you to the main site, and then Mike has pointed everybody to a YouTube. That's really great. Okay, so any small funding, can I get some clarification about what small funding is? well, okay, so I'll take a stab at that. So for it, like Clark pointed out, commercial partners can be effective there, right? So you can any of those commercial cloud providers provide, roughly between $5,000 and $25,000 in commercial cloud credits. That's a really awesome resource. Um, there's also many of the foundations that would fund such things also only kind of operate in the 5 to 25,000 kind of range. They're trying to seed activity to so that you can pursue something larger versus providing funding for the whole thing. So $5,000 to $25,000 gets you quite a lot, but it doesn't get you a whole machine. So those ones, in that sort of small whole machine type of range, that's where your CC star is going to be the best bet, in my opinion. So you can get some CPUs and maybe a GPU in the several $100,000 range in that category. Um, okay, let's see. Do I have any? I see. Thank you for the pointer to the Nair pilot. Yes. So Nair pilot and Access are closely aligned. I should add that to that slide deck. Thank you for that. Do I have any thoughts as funding for cyber infrastructure for education from tech firms? Oh, okay. Yeah, so they you can get Google Cloud resources for education, working with uh, Meta and Google has a lot of they have different kinds of priorities than the national priorities. So sometimes it's not really clear about what those priorities are. And so I in the past when we have been able to secure funding from somebody like Meta or Google, it's often been, utilizing some of their resources to accomplish a science aim, and not really to stand up infrastructure per se. Let's see. Oh, thank you for the pointer to the Mississippi AI network. That's awesome. Um, no funding for what the NSF calls infrastructure, meaning nothing beyond the machine you're buying. Yes, yes, that's right. Though that's a challenge. That can be a real challenge. You can probably, in some circumstances, get some service rates applied there, but it is a big challenge for everybody. Okay, more comments from Henry. Thank you. Okay, this was is there funding for things like air conditioning, power, infrastructure, and labor associated? Yes and no. That one, with our Jetstream award, we have several contracts out there, which, we include some of, service contracts, and the infrastructure contracts we buy from a particular vendor, and they do the integration and haul it in. So there's labor that goes into it that isn't sort of necessarily billed straight as labor, but it's definitely installed. Um, I think you have to carefully review the solicitation requirements to understand what is allowable and what's not allowable. And sometimes you have to do that, under the uniform guidance. You definitely have to do it always under uniform guidance, but you have to work with the people in your research office or your sponsored programs office who have a detailed understanding of uniform guidance to understand what costs are allowable and what costs are not allowable. It's complicated, it doesn't necessarily make sense to people outside of that everyday context. I really appreciate the responses in there. I won't go ahead and read them. I think that's super helpful to put those in there. Okay. I think it's Henry's giving me the hook to go on to the panel, so I will go ahead and be quiet now.
No, no problem. I want to turn the panel over to our moderator, and we may end up running a little bit long, but that's just going to spill over into the lunch hour, so I feel like we'll be forgiven. Now we move on to the CI funding landscape panel. Our moderator is Tabitha Samuel, and so take it away, Tabitha.
Will do. Thanks, Henry. And Henry, could you just give me a nudge when we are getting to time? I would assume about five after-ish is fine.
Yeah, even a little more. Spill if you need to spill. It's a good sized panel, so I want to encourage you all to and I feel confident everybody who's here wants to know about money.
Absolutely. Me too.
So this will be the most popular topic by far.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Winona, for that wonderful talk. I've been furiously taking notes as you've been talking, so that was great. What I'm going to do is we're going to have a quick round of introductions, and I've got a list of prepared questions with me. But what's going to be way more interesting is if the 166 folks here can actually start asking the panel questions, because I am sure your questions are way more interesting than mine. So, and way more important too. So please, in chat, just keep asking questions, and then we will start asking the panelists some of them. So to start things off, could our panelists please start with a round of introductions? And in your introduction, could you give us an overview of where you're from and briefly how your research computing center is being currently funded? Why don't we start with Ryan?
Oh no. Thank you, Tabitha. Yeah, my name is Ryan Johnson. I'm the Director of Research Computing at the University of South Dakota. And my story of how we're funded is pretty short. It is basically all grants. So lots of CC Star. We've had a lot of success there. And then as well as there was an MRI before my time and a couple of state-based grants from our Board of Regents. But yeah, my capital and operating budgets are zero. So it is all grants all the time, aside from a few other random things that have come our way.
Dave?
Hi, everybody. How's my audio?
Perfect.
Great, great. I'm Dave Hudak. I'm from the Ohio Supercomputer Center. We're abbreviated as OSC. We're located in Columbus, Ohio. We are an initiative of the state of Ohio and directed by the Ohio Department of Higher Education. And our budgets basically come from three sources. The first is a state allocation, both a capital and an operating. The second is user fees that we assess for various types of CPU, GPU, and storage usage. And then lastly is grants, which predominantly pay people, research software engineers, facilitators, things like that.
Sounds good. Mandy?
Good morning. I'm Mandy Terrell. I'm the Associate CIO and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of California, San Francisco. We have actually two clusters. We have a cluster that is funded by a co-op model where faculty pay in kind of one time with grant funding. So they contribute hardware, and that is mainly grant funded at a one time for life, which you can imagine that hasn't been sustainable. And then our chancellor has been subsidizing with our paying our operational costs for my administrators. And then recently we were able to secure funding from our chancellor to build a new cluster, which we are standing up currently, and that is a new kind of focused GPU heavy AI cluster. And that will actually be will be partially funded by capital funds and user fees. So it's kind of, we have kind of a mixed model. So we're transitioning away from that co-op to more of a condo user-based model.
Joel?
Hi, everyone. Joel Zisman, University of Nevada, Reno. We have four main models of funding when it comes down to it. Number one, we have a chargeback like many people do, CPU hours, storage, things like that. Those rates are, fairly strictly negotiated with our finance offer. Through that, we get a lot of our operational funding through that, as well as being able to contribute a really decent percentage of our last upgrade as well. Secondly, obviously, we do get grants from researchers. We use those mostly for sponsored upgrades dedicated to those grants as opposed to more general utilization. Third, the largest section of our funding really comes from our VPRI, laid out what it is. There's no direct connection where we are from the overhead or what have you to our RC area at all. And then finally, one area we're very excited about and we're going to be focusing on this year is industry. Challenge is obviously State University. We have to try to learn to move at that speed that industry does, but it does give us an opportunity to not only make intellectual contributions, but factual ones as well.
Awesome. Clark?
Greetings, everybody. I'm Clark Gaylord. I'm the Director of Research Technology Services and Karen at George Washington University. I'll also call on some of my experience from Virginia Tech. I retired from Virginia Tech in 2020, and my last tour of duty there was as the Chief Information Officer for the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. So a very different funding model between the two organizations and call, where that was a soft-funded research institute at a major state university. At GW, it's a contributor model from stakeholder schools supplemented by overhead money from the VPRI and provost and IT. So our major research schools, GW is essentially a collective of schools that are relatively autonomous from a business model perspective in many cases. So there's cooperation and independence. So engineering, arts and science, medicine, and public health are major research schools and contribute to that. That came from a funding model around paying off a 5-year debt on our last major cluster investment. And I just went to the schools and said, well, you've already budgeted for, $1 million of total money coming into this program. Let's just keep doing that. You already budgeted for contributing to this pot. Just keep doing that. Positions are base funded. Then there's also storage. Cloud is passed through. Storage is specific targeted investment, but also a similar model where they contribute to a fund that really offsets that. We do augment that with specific targeted investments for specific hardware platforms where a research program wants to bring that either into the cluster or as a standalone system that we'll maintain for them.
Winona.
Hi, it's me again. So we, in case you're missing me, I'm here. We have a centrally managed facility. It's Research Technologies is the name of the group. We have a large Cray machine and a high throughput machine that are funded locally. And we have the Jetstream Cloud or Jetstream 2 Cloud machine, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. So we do not charge anything at all for compute. Anyone, faculty, staff, or student can get an account and use the compute. Storage, we also don't charge anymore. So we can talk about that. But basically, there are procedural restrictions, we'll call them. And let's see, so all of that's open. We have Craig is here on the call, so he can comment. But we've never charged for compute, which is something that is unique, I think. Let's see, except so people have broken down, kind of asking some questions in the chat here. I see. So our institution is 45,000 students. The cluster has a few, or the Cray machine has, hundreds of nodes. We do have cloud computing offerings that are not managed as part of our group. We have a VMware cloud. We call it Intelligent Infrastructure. That's entirely a pay-for service. And then we also have contracts with the commercial clouds, so people can pay for AWS, GCP, so on. That's entirely passed through. So that's how we sort of break things down.
And to wrap up the round of introductions, I'm Tabitha Samuel, and I'm the director at the National Institute for Computational Sciences, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And just about like everybody else here, my center does have a mix of funding. So a good mix of both federal funding, mostly through the National Science Foundation, but also a pretty robust industry program. So those are kind of the two big buckets that we have funding through. So to start things off, I know a few of the folks here have talked about charging for services. So when we think about that, what CI resources should be funded externally and which internally? And on the internally funded resources, what should be funded via core institutional budget and what should be charged, what should be users be charged for?
I'll go first. I wish I knew. Um, the example that I like to point at is actually Henry Neiman's model at OU, because he can put his budget up on the screen, and every line is color coded. And if it's in the first color, it's centrally covered by the administration. If it's in the second color, then it's individually charged back to the user. We have no such clarity. Our fee model emerged from just additional expenses that were passed on to the organization. And so it was largely reactive as to how we did it. And it takes a constant rebalancing to try to figure out how to tweak that in order to make sure we're not over recovery.
Any other perspectives from our panelists?
I think I've had several different funding models. So the one of the things that I found, it also depends on the organization, but compute has a relatively elastic demand. If you start charging for compute, you can quickly find a drastically different amount of demand for your services as people decide to put clusters under their desk instead. Storage, on the other hand, is sticky. But if you've got research programs that can build compute costs into their programs, and you can do that as a charge center, that can be a very successful model. So it's finding those returns on investment to the research programs and the ways you can deliver those services while still giving a base core of services, really what's important, finding that sweet spot.
I'll go back to a previous one I had as well, where everything was provided to the researchers by the institution. And I have to tell you, while during that time it was absolutely wonderful, it was not sustainable in the slightest. And quite frankly, I think if you don't charge something for it, you lose value completely from the researchers.
Yeah, I think I have to plus one what Joel was saying. That's why we're in the situation that we're in. So we have aging hardware, and there's just no, I was looking at the question in the chat, being able to replace and refresh the equipment is just become almost impossible. And especially with the financial situation that we're in now, we're trying to go back and ask for a large sum of money at this point in time. I was able to get the money last year, but this year, it was very difficult. So and then also with, the state of things with our faculty, we've experienced some stoppages of grants and faculty losing funding. And so it's also been difficult to try and ask them to pay when they paid 5 years ago and they're saying, well, I have hardware that lasts 8 years. Why do you want me to pay now? So that's also been a difficult conversation to have. But I think what we've found is also going back to security and talking to them about, they also want the latest and the greatest. So that's been another way that we've started kind of having those conversations of, well, we want to give you the latest hardware. In order to do that, we do need to charge a small fee. So we're trying to find that balance of, can we have a small user fee to just get you to also facilitate good behavior, to help train you, and then get them into kind of this new cluster, but then also keep our older cluster up and running at, which is currently free for a lot of our users and our learners. because they've paid into that again for life. And then our new cluster will have a small fee. So we're trying to find that right balance. But it is hard, and I think we just can't have something free. And we're also the other thing I also, so to answer the question above, we are also we don't have an undergraduate program. It's all post grad. So we have about 14,000 researchers. And right now in our Winton, which is our older cluster, we have between 15 and 1,600 users, but it's all postdocs and faculty. So we're a little unique in that we don't have an undergraduate program.
So I kind of want to follow up on the question in the chat here. So the question is, how do you manage life cycle refreshes as equipment ages out of warranty and support from a funding perspective? And what I want to add to that is, uh, as Winona was sharing earlier, much of NSF funding and other federal funding funds the machine. But what about funding supporting infrastructure such as firewalls, your core networking equipment, etc.? So how do you fund that kinds of equipment? And also generally, what are your hardware refresh cycles like?
Well, and power and cooling, of course, is a big.
Absolutely. Sure.
And so once again, that return on investment, the color of money is really important too. If you are charging extramural sources, then this is the definition of success for your researcher and providing them an opportunity to charge extramural sources. If you're just moving the clams around internally and can do things on a showback, then that's essential for that too. So I think that's an important part of that. But yeah, oftentimes your data center costs, your power and cooling, network infrastructure and so forth is one of those things you need to build into the model of what it costs to run the organization, and probably is going to be justified as an institutional return on investment. That's sort of a base of what your institution is probably going to have to provide for institutional investment. But as I mentioned in the comment in the chat, you can roll that into a cost recovery service center if your organization is such that can support those cost recoveries. Again, if you're only charging internal money, all you're doing is hurting yourself. But if you're able to use cost recovery to incur that, and generating F&A is a good thing for your researchers, then that can be a very effective model. The others, I never try to look at the one-time cost as one-time cost. Try to always divide that into the number of years you're going to get out of it as a capitalization. And I was fortunate coming in here that was how they structured the purchase, was as a 5-year lease. But I always try to think of that anyway, even if that's not the case. And so rather than think of lots of money one time and spreading it over years, think about doing a portion of your infrastructure each year. So each year you're spending a similar amount of money. It might be on different things if you've got a capital approach. If you can level it with financing, that's great. But I think that helps a lot too, because it keeps people thinking about what do you need every year to keep this sustainable.
Makes sense. Dave?
Yeah, Tabitha, what I would say to that is similarly to what Clark just mentioned. We have our own data center space that we pay rent for and power for, and any renovations that occur in the space, we do the cost for that. We buy all our own hardware, all our own networking hardware, all our own storage hardware. We do lease an alternative data center up in Cleveland for redundancy. So we've got a much different balance sheet than a lot of centers because we have to be so self-contained. We work a lot of that into our proposals that go back to the state. We don't always get all the funding we wanted. In fact, recently we just didn't. We're hopeful for next year, but we'll see. But you have to just keep making that case and that argument.
Thank you. One more question from our audience here. And I know this topic can get to a point where we're talking about it for 4 hours and still not done. So I'm going to ask you to really keep your answers concise here. Has your institution's administrative leadership pushed for cloud computing in lieu of on-premise infrastructure? How have you addressed this? I see a lot of nodding heads. Let's go for it. Joel.
I'll jump in. Absolutely. This is being asked at all levels at University of Nevada right now. What is the story with the cloud? And quite frankly, I'm embracing it right now. I think that on premises, building big infrastructures has a problem in that we punish the good citizens who do contribute to the on-premises areas and tend to ignore the freeloaders an awful lot. I think a cloud model, on the other hand, where we have a direct pass-through for those costs, will make the research more honest about what we're funding and what we're able to fund and do.
Dave, did you have something to add?
Yeah. We just haven't found a way to make specifically commercial cloud work from the point of view of a cost effectiveness. We're still substantially cheaper. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a fraction of what you would pay for in the cloud. And of course, being quote unquote part of the state government, one of the questions we always get is, why are we buying this equipment when we've got these data centers that are getting put in? Amazon's putting in one, Microsoft's putting in one. Why don't we just do our stuff there? Private sector, a lot more efficient, right? And which politicians understand at the very top level. And I work for those politicians, so I'll leave it at that.
Any other thoughts here?
Billion-dollar marketing budgets have a way of encouraging people to think a certain way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that that's where reality is.
Winona.
Yeah, so we might be unique here, but our data center serves multiple purposes, not just our institutional research computing. I mean, in addition to the enterprise stuff, we also have some state data and some other a private partner as well. So our data center, has that goes into a lot of this sort of thinking, and that the institutions invested in this data center as part of a larger strategy. And so, when you couple that with, sunk cost with Dave's, cost effectiveness arguments, which we, do frequent return on investment types of calculations to understand where our researchers are at and where we're at. It's a no-brainer to keep investing in, our HPC on-prem.
The value of cloud is that elasticity and flexibility in operating, but it's an operating expense. It's not an investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in South Dakota, we haven't had a whole lot of push. I mean, we've had individual researchers and labs interested in cloud, and that's largely been NIH-funded folks, with the STRIDES program. But I think once everyone sees, what's this going to cost me if I try to scale up or use it long term, then that kind of scares them away. And again, also we don't charge anything for our local HPC too. So unless there's some reason why our resources won't work for them, there's not a whole lot of motivation for our users to look elsewhere to the commercial cloud.
So we have another related cloud question, but I think we've been talking a little bit about compute here, but this question is regarding data. So related to cloud, persistent cloud storage costs a lot, but is necessary for cloud HPC. How do you avoid vendor lock? How do you deal with the balkanized research data landscape? Are you aware of researchers? Are there researchers on campus who have much of their data in the cloud and you have to interface your on-prem resources with these? How does that work? Mandy?
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons why we were pushing to stand up our on-prem HPC environment. We had a faculty who was running, because we didn't have the GPU heavy environment, they were running in the cloud, and I want to say they were spending upwards of 10,000 a week in AWS, which is pretty common. So we're working to get our environment up to move them out of the cloud. So I know it's very common, and we kind of had a we have a three-tier strategy. We do have cloud resources. We don't allow Google at UCSF. We have AWS, Azure, and then so they've been using AWS right now. And we do have at the UC level, in order to bring our costs down, we are fortunate enough that our UCOP does negotiate kind of a reduced rate for Azure and AWS, but it's still That again, we say reduced rate, but it's still, when we look at, the cost, it's still cheaper to do on-prem.
So moving on, how do you convince your institution's administration that your approach to funding is the right one for your institution? What kind of metrics or other information do you use and have found valuable for making this argument? Not all at once.
Getting the trust of leadership is always fraught, right? How do you establish that credibility? And authority follows credibility, but it's a chicken and egg thing because you have to be able to do something first to show that you're credible. So those first business cases have to resonate with the reality that the leadership has. And so if you bring in a message that is fundamentally different from the way they thought reality was, you have a hard message to paint. So understand where their perspective is first. If you've got to bring them a long way to understand the realities of funding CI, that's fine, but understand where they are to bring them through that conversation to establish that credibility that you understand them and the problems they're trying to solve in the business of your organization.
Any metrics or data that you use to relay to your upper management about funding that's proven effective?
The couple that come to mind are, clearly cost avoidance is an easy one for people to understand. So if we just straight convert, these HPC cycles into cloud cycles, how much does it cost, right? And so that can be compelling, but it's not, a single number that wins it. We frequently have, what we call impact highlights. These are more qualitative, like stories about the research that is done, utilizing these resources and like what capabilities, or discoveries these led to. Those are things that, provosts and vice presidents of research like to hear for sure. And, there's also, not another number, which is I consider the most fraught with peril, is like how much money the researchers who are relying on your resource are bringing in. And so at different institutions, this can be, we're at a liberal arts institution, so not all areas of science or of scholarship, I should say, lead to big dollar figures, but still they need instrumentation nonetheless, right, to do their scholarship. But that's another piece to the puzzle too. Particularly, in our institution, we have a big medical school, so we like to show off that, the medical school researchers use these resources and rely on them for a lot of different things.
Any other perspectives from the panel?
Yeah, what I would say is it is primarily, as Winona just said, you've got quantitative and qualitative successes to report. And it's really critical to assess what the audience is you're tailoring the message to. Academic leadership is different than institutional leadership like CIOs or administration and planning. And that's certainly very different from faculty. The other thing I'd mention that I wish I was this good, but I recently met a colleague who has a good operation, and I asked him about it. And I said, what do you report back to your stakeholders? He said, nothing. He said, I just tell my faculty, your voice matters 10 times what my voice means. Speak up, speak up, speak up, and boy, if there was a way we could harness that, I think it would be really powerful.
That is amazing. Related, what's the easiest funding conversation you've had? Easiest successful funding conversation you've had, Dave?
Tabitha, the first thing I wrote down was pass. But on hindsight, it is a funding discussion and where the funding has arrived from outside.
Mhm.
Of course, that is the easiest kind of funding discussion because the money shows up and you've got people, you can move quickly on things like that. It's when you have to get into pots of dollars that have already been allocated and already have stakeholders associated with it, because those automatically have to go above where my head is. And all we can do is make our best request and get the decisions back that we get.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I have had a major scientific research program that could make the case of this is in 5 years, we will have a $50 to $100 million return if we can put $2 million into the CI infrastructure. That's the easiest conversation to have. I think that's easier than extramural CC star and similar funding because your institution needs to support those. And so your business case on accepting money in these cases of the scientific program driving it, that case is there.
So how would you advise an institution that is new to research computing to secure funding for its required resources?
My first guidance, it was to look holistically and sustainably. It is much bigger than the expense of the hardware. It's much bigger than 2x the expense of the hardware. And the institution should do some real soul searching around what outcomes they wish to see from this investment and tailor it accordingly.
Yeah, and my perspective on that is, really look to other institutions in your state or region who have maybe already done it. When I started in this position, it was actually really good timing. It was right at the start of the Great Plains Cyber Team CC Star Award. And so my predecessor departed and I stepped in and replaced him. And it could not have been a better time for me to kind of, sort of get onboarded into this community. I spent my entire career in central IT up to that point. And so much of this was new to me. But the Great Plains Network, the GPN community is just amazing. And there were a lot of very experienced, wise people that I could learn from. And so I actually, my first CC Star proposal, I was a co-PI, and frankly, I was Ringo on that proposal. I mean, I think they brought me along as, maybe they pitied me. But that gave me really valuable experience, and now I've, led or co-led, I think three more successful CC Star proposals. So I think looking at those resources of, people who can help you get started, and that's really a great place to start.
And I think talking to your faculty. So when I started at UCSF, I spent a lot of time with my faculty. So talking to them, finding out what they needed, finding out what the gaps are, finding out what the gaps of the institution are, and then figuring out, as Ryan said, what are talking to Berkeley, talking to Stanford around, what are the resources around us, what are our gaps, and then using the faculty to advocate. They went with me to the chancellor and we presented our case together. So it was a united front. It was me with, four of our biggest faculty who brought in the most amount of funding dollars, saying we can't bring in funding without this resource. If you want us to bring in, I think Winona mentioned the chancellors want funding to come in. They want the grant funding to come in. And so by hearing from those faculty, we're limited to what we can do right now with the resources we have. And if you invest in this, this is what we're going to be able to bring in. That was a really impactful statement. So it was, here's the metrics we have now. Here's what we can do here. And if you invest in this, here's what we're going to be able to do down the road. So I think that was a really powerful message back to our chancellor. Whereas our CIO was more looking at, okay, what's it going to cost us in hardware? Our chancellor was like, how much funding, how much grant funding are we going to bring in?
And faculty recruitment is another critical success factor.
Yes.
Every course has that as a critical success factor.
So what have been your most successful approaches for acquiring external funding? And by external, I kind of covering federal foundations, industry, so everything that's not your own institutions. So what's worked and also what's not worked?
I think I found one of the most successful ones for us has been industry in the previous place with it. One of the biggest challenges, however, is making sure that you can actually get renewals from industry to keep them interested in what you're doing and that you can support the actual requests that they're making for it. Very easy to say you have a large cluster, you have tons of storage, but actually getting it to a usable state for those people can be very, very challenging at times.
Anybody else on what's been successful or not worked as well as you expected to when it comes to external funding?
Well, it just, it falls into what is it you're trying to fund.
Mhm.
If you want to fund a team of engineers, it's a lot harder to do that with user fees than it is with a 3 or 5 year NSF award.
So a few of the panelists have talked about usage models and chargebacks for users. So could you tell us a little bit more about these charging models and what was the reasoning that went into how those rates are defined?
Well, I can talk to our experience here. We have a very detailed costing analysis, including both capital and operating, that ultimately results in, after a lot of arguments about depreciation schedules and things like that, that results in what is our per unit cost for a core hour, for a GPU hour, and for a terabyte month. And then based on those cost points, we derive three price sheets. We derive the commercial price sheet, which is at market but above our cost. The nonprofit or government price sheet, which is what we charge universities in other states, and that's basically at our cost. And then the Ohio academic rates are substantially discounted off that cost.
We do something similar. So we look at the depreciation over 5 years for the hardware. We factor that in, and then we roll in a percentage of time for our administrators, our system administrators. And then we have an internal rate, which is for our internal faculty and learners. And then we have an external rate for our affiliates. So kind of the same model. That way we can and being able to replace our hardware, it's at the cost of time of purchase, which it makes it a little difficult, in 5 years when you do need to replace, because I think we all know hardware isn't the same cost in 5 years. But at least it gives us something to have funding to be able to replace in 5 years. And we've also we try and keep our rates. We have had some struggle with rates. We've tried to look at what other institutions have charged around us, and tried to kind of present that back to our faculty as well, because we do get a lot of feedback on our rates.
Mm-hmm.
I think the cloud has also made that conversation easier because it's so much more expensive and so obviously so. But I think Dave's point about, understanding what your costs are, I think that's one of the best models there. But there's knowing what's subsidizing it. I think where institutions sometimes fall off on that is when you have a financial leader that thinks, I can recover all the costs of this operation, and not understanding where those investments come that cover the base, that you get a return on investment that are difficult to see in that way. A 70% recovery is a really good cost recovery center.
Mhm.
And getting institutions to recognize that that's really good and that's better than zero is important. And in the case of Dave, I think it's probably the case for you, you're getting that taxpayer contribution, taking that piece of it. Within an institution, you're finding some sort of an ROI and building that program and student success and researcher success metrics and things like that. But preparing leadership that you can't recover 100% of your costs and be successful, but we can benchmark them against commercial rates, and we can make a case for chargeback in order to have opportunities to recover extramural funding.
Yeah, I like to tell folks around our campuses, we can provide leverage. not match.
That's a good term.
So we have another question from the audience. Do any of your staff embed with research teams and receive some funding from the grant? How did you get that started? I think that's a great question, and that's yet another very good opportunity for sustained funding. Winona?
Yeah, yes, we have a long history of doing this, and it's kind of dicey. That's the best way to say it. So they're depending on, your institutional constraints, and I mean, how many staff you have versus how many, if basically I treat that kind of like a funding opportunity in and of itself. Like people have core duties, and if they are having to, spend some amount of time beyond that, then we have to have a conversation about the amount of time they're spending with any one individual researcher. That's really where that starts. And depending on, we've over the years it's morphed. It's like, oh well, over 4 hours. Like that's no, come on, you can spend quite a lot of time for, solving a problem that's really part, so it can be anywhere between 20 and 80 hours. Like if you that you need to have, you start with that conversation with the researcher, because as if you have funding to serve your whole institution, right, then you've exceeded that capacity pretty quickly. But if you're funded by a specific agent, specific area within your institution, right? So sometimes departments will chip in and there's an expectation, right? There. But again, it's that initial conversation that's really important. In my view, the real tricky part is the sort of backfill situation where you're just, if they are going to go do work, extended work outside of their core areas, then how do you fill that expertise? Because you can't just go grab somebody off the street and plunk them in as a research software engineer or as a sysadmin, right? So that's another sort of consideration about, when you're pursuing those opportunities.
And I would add they have occurred opportunistically. We
Mhm.
have not turned them into a structural entity. It's one of the things we're thinking about. I think one of the real disconnects is oftentimes a faculty member will come and talk with me. I don't know enough either about their discipline or about the technologies at this point to really say, yes, we have an engineer, we have a staff member who can contribute. A lot of times that faculty member has to get that through direct contact with one of the members of the technical teams. And we're not sure quite how to scale that.
Yeah, I would point to Princeton as a successful kind of
Mhm.
model for the research software engineer.
Yeah.
They basically have a funding model where you have, if one can include in one's grant a 50% of a research software engineer, then the institution will kick in the other 50%. To me, that's a huge win. I think that program's tremendous. We don't have that for sure.
Mhm.
But that's certainly worth, it's that overall conversation about institutional priorities and what the institution is wanting to support.
Yeah,
Uh,
we do MOUs each year, and then we build it in with the grant funding. And because my team is fully recharge, so we receive very little core funding. And so we have, and one of the things that we're doing at UCSF is we are doing what's called the IT operating model, which is where we're moving. I think someone talked about GPUs under desks. We're actually working to eliminate that, which has been a huge initiative. So one of the things that we're doing is actually moving all storage compute into central IT, and then also helping support faculty with with that type of assistance. And then we also have, so we do MOUs back. We've moved core systems, storage, and compute. So we've been working on that over the last 3 years to kind of do discovery and then move those resources. So I think an MOU helps with kind of that that yearly conversation and kind of expectations, and then the funding, the grant funding, but then also making sure that you plan for it, that coming back onto your budget the next year and how you're going to fund that person. Because that's been some of the struggle, is that person is funded by the grant, and then you have to figure out how you're going to fund them back when they come back the next year.
I agree. That's also,
That,
sorry, go ahead, Joel.
I was going to say that was my biggest problem I ran into, Mandy nailed it. Just ongoing, continuing support of these personnel when they did drop off of the grant. And, if you can't continue to support them, fantastic. I always had the luck to be able to get them on other grants in the future. But boy, it can get scary sometimes.
Yes. I think pair that with how do you fund parts of a person and where does the other half come from? And I love the Princeton model for that. That's fantastic. That's
It's
institutional.
amazing.
So I think we are close to wrapping up here, but I want to definitely get this question through so research funding has started getting into uncharted waters, especially when it comes to federal funding sources. So have you and other leadership at your institution started thinking about maybe we should be thinking about this a little differently? Have you new strategies or different ways of approaching funding in this year and going forward?
Well, the short answer is we are trying to position ourselves as a logical alternative to local expenses, right? This is the time when all academics need to be smarter with their dollars. We provide a number of efficiencies, and we're trying to make our value proposition as strong as it can to let people know if you're looking to do this, we're probably one of your best options for doing it.
Yeah. I think you guys have a great value proposition there, Dave, to your constituents. For us, it's trying to help our faculty be successful with making private and corporate connections. Certainly, driving from their success, but if we can help them position relative to that, that's a good place to be.
And I think another thing I'd like to add is locally here at Tennessee, we are starting to see how do we collaborate regionally. I think that's something we haven't done in the past. So now I think this situation that we're in is starting to force us to collaborate a little bit more and then look at our sister institutions just sitting right down the road from us. Any final thoughts from the panelists about funding? What should I have asked and did not? Any final nuggets of wisdom I would love to leave the audience with this thought. Well, hearing nothing, thank you so much to all our panelists here, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your CI Leadership Academy.
Great job, Tabitha. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and let's give a big round of virtual applause to our panel. This has just been terrific, and we really appreciate what y'all have provided today. Quick program note about our next session coming up. So we've got a lunch break, and then just under an hour from now, so 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, noon Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific will be our next session. That's strategic thinking and visioning. So essentially learning how to think like a leader. So we look forward to seeing y'all there. We're going to leave the Zoom session live. So y'all are welcome to just stay logged in and go have yourself a delicious lunch, refresh your beverage, take a bio break, check a few emails, leave the session live, and we'll see you in just under an hour.